story of the Tudors! So, the first Tudor king of England was Henry Tudor. He was born in Pembroke in 1457, which is why he was the first Welsh king of England. Henry became King Henry VII because, of course, he was rightful king. Except, he wasn't! Henry's claim to the throne was that Edward III's fourth son's son, by a woman he wasn't even married to, was Henry's mother's father's father, which meant that his claim was rubbish. But that didn't matter, because Henry Tudor became Henry VII by beating Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field, proving that Richard III had been really naughty all along and clearly shouldn't have been king in the first place. He then married Richard's niece, Anne, just to make sure that there was no more squabbling about silly things like who killed who in the Tower of London. So Henry ruled wisely and made a lasting peace with Spain when he married his eldest son, Arthur, to Catherine of Aragon. Except that in 1502, Arthur died in Ludlow. So Henry had to get special permission from the Pope to let Arthur's younger brother, Henry, marry Catherine, so he could keep up the alliance with Spain, even though the church said that that was very naughty. So Henry VIII became king in 1509, and he and Catherine lived happily ever after. Except, come on, you know this one, they didn't! Catherine didn't have a son, only a daughter. And Henry was convinced that it was God's punishment because he had married his brother's wife. So he asked the Pope for a divorce, but the Pope said, "No way, Jose!" He wasn't taking no for an answer. He just started a new church, which he called the Church of England, made himself head of it, and granted himself a divorce. And while he was at it, he closed the monasteries and took all their lands and money, so that he was suddenly very rich indeed. Meaning that he could marry Anne Boleyn, and they lived happily ever after. Except they didn't. Anne didn't manage to give birth to a son, only a daughter, Elizabeth. So Henry decided that God was cross with him, and it was all her fault. Nothing to do with the monasteries thing, of course. So he decided she should have her head chopped off. Ouch, that's gotta hurt. But luckily, Henry marries again. He marries Jane Seymour. And this time it's for real. They get married, she has a baby boy, and they live happily ever after. Except that, you guessed it, they don't. Henry really was in love with Jane, and she really did give birth to a son, Edward. But she died in the process, and that was the end of that. Even though Henry had a son, he didn't have a wife. So he decided to order one on the internet. Well, from Flanders, which was roughly the 16th century equivalent. But when she arrived, she didn't look like the picture on eBay, so he sent her back. Well, divorced her. He tries again, but this time with someone homegrown. Next, he marries Anne Boleyn's cousin, Catherine Howard, even though she's only 19 and he's 49. Everything's going great until Henry finds out that she prefers boys her own age, so he chops her head off as well. That must hurt. So Henry decides to give up on wives and go around hunting and invading Scotland instead. And that's that for wives! Except it isn't! Would you believe it? He marries again to Catherine Parr. And this time, perhaps to her relief, he dies! And that's the end of the Tudors. But of course it's not. Henry had 3 children, Mary, Elizabeth and Edward. So, of course they gave the throne to the eldest, Mary. Except they didn't, because she was a girl. So obviously couldn't rule the country. No, they gave it to the youngest child, Edward, because he was the best at football or something like that, even though he was only 9 years old. They think it's all over. It is now! dies, age only 15. And just to annoy his sisters, he says that his cousin, Lady Jane Grey, is going to be queen, which is just what happens for 9 days, after which Edward's big sis Mary becomes queen and everyone's happy. Except Lady Jane, who has her head cut off. But of course they're not. Henry, and especially Edward, had told everybody that they had to be Protestants. But Mary's a Catholic and tells them that they all have to be Catholic again, or she'll kill them, which she does a lot. She also marries Prince Philip of Spain, but in spite of a few false alarms, they don't have a baby son or daughter. When she dies in 1558, the Tudor line is over. Except it isn't. Henry VIII's youngest daughter, Elizabeth, comes to the throne, and England has a golden age of art, exploration and science. Except, well, actually, it does! Elizabeth's reign lasts for 45 years, in which time English poets and playwrights write some of the greatest plays and poems in history. English explorers sail around the world and start colonies in North America. And English scientists invent the helicopter. Except the bit about the helicopter. And when Elizabeth dies in 1603, her children and her children's children reign in glorious peace. Except of course they don't. Elizabeth dies childless, and that's the end of the Tudors. Finished, kaput, end of story. Can I watch Despicable Me now?